It's a crazy thought, right? How can one single moment, a couple of gunshots on a city street, spark a global catastrophe? Well, we're about to see how one assassination didn't just end a life. It ended an entire era and completely reshaped the world as we know it.
Okay, so picture this. It's June 28, 1914, in Sarajevo. In this car, you've got Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who's the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, and his wife, Sophie. They've just been shot point blank. She's collapsing, she's dying, and her husband, well, he only has seconds left to live.
And that's really the heart of it, isn't it? How did this one targeted act of violence spiral into what we now call the Great War, a conflict that would cost millions of lives and pull in empires from all over the globe? That's the question we're here to answer.
To really get it, we've got to start with the event itself, because that day was just filled with these incredible security mistakes, a lot of missed chances, and one single, unbelievably fateful wrong turn.
And here's the wild part. The assassination almost didn't even happen. You see, there was a bomb attack earlier that morning, but it failed. So the Archduke decides he wants to go visit the wounded in the hospital. But then his driver takes a wrong turn, and by just the most incredible sheer chance, he stops the car right in front of another assassin, who could not believe his luck.
But, okay, let's be real. A single murder, no matter how important the person is, doesn't just cause a world war. To understand why this one did, we have to zoom out and look at the tensions that were just simmering all across Europe. The assassination, it wasn't the cause, it was just the spark that lit the whole thing on fire.
So the real issue here, the thing bubbling right under the surface, was nationalism. Austria-Hungary was this massive, multi-ethnic empire. And the ethnic Serbs inside its borders, they wanted out. They wanted to join with Serbia and create a brand new Slavic nation. And that was the absolute root of all this hostility. And if that wasn't enough, you had this even bigger problem hanging over everything. The great powers of Europe had basically sorted themselves into two giant competing military teams. The Triple Alliance, that's Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, facing off against the Triple Entente, France, Russia, and Great Britain. Now, the idea behind these alliances was, to keep the peace through a balance of power. The promise was simple. An attack on one of us is an attack on all of us. But what they actually created was this terrifying fear. A small local conflict could trigger a chain reaction, pulling every single major power into a massive war. It was basically a continental tripwire.
So let's watch exactly how that tripwire gets sprung. We're going to look at what happened right after the assassination and see how it pulled one nation after another into the fight.
I mean, just look at this timeline. It shows how unbelievably fast everything fell apart. On July 28th, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. Russia, who's Serbia's protector, starts mobilizing its army. Well, that triggers Germany to declare war on Russia, and then on Russia's ally, France. In just a couple of weeks, that continental tripwire had sprung, and the whole of Europe was at war. So Germany is now facing its absolute worst nightmare, a massive war on two fronts. They're fighting France in the west and Russia in the east. They knew they couldn't win a long, drawn-out war like that, so they came up with this really daring, high-risk plan to get a quick victory.
They called it the Schlieffen Plan. And honestly, the logic was brutally simple. Step 1. Invade France, but do it through neutral Belgium to get around their big border defenses. Step 2. Use lightning speed to capture Paris and knock France out of the war in just a few weeks. And then, Step 3. Pivot the entire German army to the east to deal with Russia, who they assumed would be way too slow to be an immediate threat. But see, the whole plan hinged on one massive, fatal assumption, that Russia would be slow. And that assumption? It was dead wrong. Thanks to some reforms they'd made before the war, Russia mobilized with surprising speed, forcing Germany to pull precious troops over to the Eastern Front way earlier than they'd planned. The Schlieffen Plan was already falling apart. So what you end up with is this bizarre situation. Two completely different wars, really. Over in the west, the German advance gets stopped cold at the First Battle of the Marne, and that leads to this brutal stalemate. But over in the east, German troops win a stunning, massive victory at Tannenberg. The dream of a quick war was over. It was now just a bloody brawl on two fronts. So yeah, the dream of a quick war? Totally gone. And that's when the conflict started to spill out everywhere. What started in Europe very quickly began to pull in empires and nations from every corner of the globe. Suddenly, you have the Ottoman Empire and Bulgaria jumping in with Germany and Austria-Hungary, and they become the central powers. On the other side, Japan and Italy join the Allies.
And because you have these vast colonial empires of Britain and France involved, fighting soon breaks out in Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. It was now truly a world war.
This number marks another crucial turning point. 1,198. That is how many civilians died when a German U-boat torpedoed the passenger ship the Lusitania on May 7, 1915.
But out of all those people, this is the number that would change the course of the war, 128. That's how many of the victims were American citizens. And that sinking turned public opinion in the United States, which was still neutral at the time, sharply against Germany. It was setting the stage for America to eventually enter the war.
And as the war just grinds on, the human cost it's just off the charts. By 1916, single battles like Verdun and the Somme would go on for months and result in casualties in the hundreds of thousands, or in the case of the Somme, over 1 million people. It was industrialized warfare on a scale nobody had ever seen before.
After years of this just brutal, bloody stalemate, the year 1917 brings two massive, game-changing events that would finally break the deadlock and decide who was going to win this thing.
Okay, so first, the good news for Germany. Revolution rips through Russia, and the new government pulls out of the war completely. This frees up hundreds of thousands of German soldiers to move to the Western Front. But then came the really bad news. British intelligence intercepts something called the Zimmermann telegram. It was a secret message where Germany was trying to convince Mexico to attack the United States. And that was the final straw. America declared war.
So it literally becomes a race against time. Germany launches one last gigantic offensive, trying to win before American forces could really arrive in huge numbers. They pushed the Allies right to the brink, but they just couldn't break them. And then, this wave of fresh American soldiers and supplies hits the front, and the tide finally begins to turn.
Exhausted and now completely overwhelmed, the Central Powers started to fall like dominoes. First Bulgaria, then the Ottoman Empire, then Austria-Hungary. Finally, with all its allies gone, Germany surrendered. At the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, the guns at last fell silent. You know, they called it the war to end all wars, but it wasn't. The incredibly harsh peace treaties that ended the conflict just planted the seeds for new problems, leaving this bitter legacy that would lead directly to an even deadlier global war just 2 decades later.